My name is Tony. I'm sitting at a cozy kitchen table, looking at the man across from me. His name is Henry Thompson, an 80-year-old with sharp, clear eyes that hold a world of secrets. Next to him, a kind-faced woman named Mildred, who's 75, moves quietly around the kitchen, putting a kettle on. It's a moment that has changed my life forever, but it all started on what I thought would be an ordinary 18th birthday. I still remember the smell of that morning in the car, a mix of cheap air freshener and an oppressive silence. My so-called parents, Richard and Lisa, were in the front seats. Richard was driving, his face set in a hard line, and Lisa sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking straight ahead. I was in the back seat, watching the streetlights blur past the window, thinking that today was supposed to be different. I'd gone to sleep the night before with a faint, cautious hope, the kind you carry when you've spent your whole childhood longing for your family to truly accept you. When I woke up, Lisa told me to pack a small bag, just enough for a few days. I got dressed quickly, not asking any questions. I'd learned early on that in this house, asking questions led to nothing but trouble. Richard drove without turning on the radio, and the silence was almost deafening. As I watched the highway signs, I realized we were heading towards the airport. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was a trip, a surprise after all those birthdays that had passed like ordinary days. We pulled into the departures lane, and Richard put the car in park without turning off the engine. Lisa reached into her purse and handed me an envelope without even looking back. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to a small town called Greenfield, deep in the rural parts of Maine. I looked up, stunned, and for a moment, I couldn't say a word. Then Richard spoke, his voice flat and rehearsed, "This is your gift. Don't come back." Lisa didn't say a thing. She just sat there, not even bothering to turn around. I sat in the back seat, holding the ticket, and 18 years of confusion came crashing down on me. I picked up my bag and got out of the car. Before I could even stand up straight on the curb, they drove away. No hug, no explanation, no last look in the mirror. They were just gone, and I was left alone on my birthday, holding a ticket to a place I'd never heard of. I didn't pretend to be strong in that moment. I sat down on a bench outside the terminal and cried. It was the ugly kind of cry, where your whole body shakes and strangers look away because they don't know what to do with your grief. I cried for a long time. Then, a kind of numbness set in. I picked up my bag, wiped my face, and walked inside. I checked in, went through security, and sat at the gate, staring at the ticket, hoping it would somehow explain itself. But it didn't. I boarded the plane because there was nothing left for me back there. The flight was short. When I landed at the small regional airport, which was barely bigger than a bus station, I almost missed her. Mildred was standing there, a small, still figure, holding a handwritten sign with my name on it in thick black marker. I stopped walking, and my heart started doing strange things. She looked at me with eyes that told a long story, and she gave me a relieved smile, like she'd been holding her breath for years and had finally exhaled. Before I could say a word, she said, "Your grandfather has been waiting 18 years to tell you the truth." I had no idea I had a grandfather, or that there was a truth to be told. All I knew was that this woman had my name on a sign, and for the first time in my life, someone was waiting for me. Mildred led me to an old, weathered red truck parked crookedly near the exit. Her hands were soft but firm as she took mine. She didn't say much on the drive, and I didn't ask. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the green and gray landscape of Maine roll past the window. It was so different from the city life I'd known. We turned down a long gravel road lined with old oak trees, and I felt a strange sensation in my chest, something I couldn't quite name, like a long-lost recognition. At the end of the road was an old but well-cared-for house, painted white with a deep front porch and flower beds that had clearly been tended with love. Sitting on the porch in a wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket, was Henry. He was watching the truck pull in. When I stepped out and he saw my face clearly, he closed his eyes for a moment. His jaw tightened, and when he opened his eyes again, they were wet. He said my name once, and the way he said it told me that I'd been deeply missed. Henry extended his hand first, respecting that I was a stranger to him in every practical sense, even if I wasn't in his heart. I shook it. His grip was gentle but deliberate. He said, "Come inside, Tony. There's a lot I owe you." We sat at the kitchen table, and Mildred put a kettle on. She moved around the kitchen quietly, knowing that some moments need just a warm background noise. Henry folded his hands on the table and looked at me steadily. He didn't beat around the bush. He decided I deserved the full truth without any cushioning. He began from the beginning. My mother, his daughter, had gotten pregnant at 20 with me. My biological father was a man named Ethan Reed, a quiet and kind-hearted young man from Greenfield who had grown up just a few streets away from this house. Henry had liked and trusted him. My mother had loved him deeply, the way you love someone when you're young and the world seems full of possibilities. But the man I'd grown up calling my father, Richard, had entered the picture when I was only 4 months old. He was older, wealthy, and had a high-profile position. He gave my mother an ultimatum: leave Ethan behind completely, cut off all ties, move away, and raise me as his own, or lose his financial and social support entirely. My mother, afraid of losing the security Richard offered, chose to leave Ethan and move across the country. Henry had protested. He'd argued with my mother, telling her that a child deserved to know her roots. She'd accused him of interfering, and they'd had a bitter fight. Then, she'd cut off all contact with Henry, moved far away, and made sure I never heard his name. Henry had written me letters every year on my birthday, 40 in total. Some were from birthdays, and some were from ordinary days when he missed me too much to stay silent. They were all stacked in a box in the next room, never sent because he had no way to reach me. Ethan had never stopped looking for me. He'd married and built a life, but he'd always kept the hope of finding me alive. 3 years ago, he'd hired a private investigator to trace what had happened to me. The search had eventually led back to Henry, who by then had almost lost hope of ever seeing me again. Together, they'd figured out that when I turned 18, the legal and practical barriers my mother had relied on would change. Henry had reached out to Richard through a lawyer, simply asking that I be given the choice to know my real history. The result was that one-way plane ticket. Henry believed it was my mother's way of finally releasing the guilt she'd carried for so many years. I sat there, taking in all this information. The kettle had long stopped whistling, and the tea in front of me had gone cold. Mildred had slipped out of the room at some point, and it was just Henry and me at the table. I asked him where Ethan was now. Henry looked at me carefully and said he was just a phone call away. He'd been told I was coming and was waiting for me to be ready to contact him. He wasn't going to push me, he'd waited this long and would wait longer if I needed him to. I asked Henry why he'd never given up. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because you were real to me even when I couldn't reach you. Some people give up on what they can't see, but I never could." I stayed in Greenfield for 2 weeks that first visit. I slept in a room that Henry had quietly kept ready for me. There were books on the shelf that he thought I might like, based on what my mother had loved as a girl. There was also a quilt that Mildred had made the previous winter. It was the first bedroom in my life that had been prepared for me with genuine care and no expectations. I met Ethan on the 4th day. He was tall, with gray at his temples. He stood in Henry's front yard, his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at me like something he'd lost had been found. We talked for hours that first afternoon, and then more in the following days. Now, I've built a strong relationship with both Henry and Ethan, and I protect it fiercely. I've never gone back to the people who drove away from that airport curb. It's not out of bitterness, I've worked through that pain over the years. It's because some doors, once opened and examined, don't need to be reopened. What my so-called parents thought was a dismissal turned out to be the best gift they could have given me. It led me to a place where I found real love and a life worth living.